Thank you for connecting to this Orchid training video. My name's Anne from Orchid Systems, and today I'm going to run through inter-entity trade, specifically the accounts payable to accounts receivable trade. Inter-entity trade allows you to automate transactions between companies. It works within one Sage 300 company database and or across multiple Sage 300 company databases. It can create mirrored transactions. For example, the accounts payable invoice in Company 1 will match the accounts receivable invoice in Company 2. And this is for when companies buy and sell goods or services from each other. Or it could create a marked up or marked down transaction to recover or recharge goods and services to another entity. There's two parts of inter-entity trade: accounts payable to accounts receivable or accounts receivable to accounts payable, and order entry to purchase orders. But the accounts payable to accounts receivable side, this is what this training video covers. It allows you to map a vendor to a customer, either within the same company database or across two databases, or map a customer to a vendor, and to create mirrored transactions between the two. You can optionally choose to mirror the invoices only or invoices, credit notes, and receipts. And you can mark up or mark down the invoice in the other database if that's appropriate. You can map the expense to revenue accounts, and you can optionally automate elimination entries to eliminate the intercompany profit on consolidation. It supports project and job costing, and it can be used with inter-entity transactions, GL triggers, to mirror AP and AR transactions between companies. For example, you might record rent received in Company 1, but part of that rent received is payable to Company 2. So the GL trigger could automatically create the AP payable in Entity 1, and then inter-entity trade could create the mirrored accounts receivable invoice in Company 2. The other functionality in inter-entity trade is OE to PO or PO to OE, and this is covered in a separate training video. Similar to AR to AP, you can map vendors to customers and customers to vendors and mirror transactions both within one company database or across multiple company databases. But you can also map ship files to customers and ship files to vendors for intercompany purchases and sales when you want to mirror just some of the lines on a transaction, not the whole transaction between companies. You can mirror orders, invoices, returns, and credit notes. You can mark up and mark down orders, invoices, returns, and credit notes. And you can optionally map the IC item codes between companies if the trading partners do not have the same item code for the same item. And it optionally supports IC serial numbers and lot numbers and project and job costing codes. The accounts receivable, accounts payable trade topics that we're going to cover are first the installation and activation of inter-entity trade, how to check your license, and assigning the visual process flows for APAR trade, which are useful in the setup and transaction processing. Then we're going to run through the configuration in inter-entity trade, the options, the trade organization setups, and also in AP and AR, because you need to map customers and vendors to each other. And then we're going to process transactions, AP and AR transactions, and when we post them, we're going to see the resulting AR and AP batches either in the same source company or in the target company, depending on our configuration. And we're going to see the APAR audit inquiry, which keeps track of the batches created in target databases and or the errors that are occurred. And once the errors have been fixed, we can use the APAR periodic processing to reprocess the errors. All our modules can be downloaded from www.orchid.systems. First, you need to log in, and then either click Product Downloads or Resources, and then select the version you want. Per version, you will find the sample data, object model, NFR serial numbers that can be used for 30-day activations, and then all our modules. Inter-entity transactions and inter-entity trade is one download from the website. So you download this program, and depending on your serial number and activation code, different options will be made available. Once you've downloaded, you can install the programs. As I've already installed the programs, it's not prompting me for my serial number and activation code, but you can fill in a serial number and select 30-day activation if you want, or key in your serial number and activation code. And then within Sage 300, you would go and activate inter-entity transactions in those databases that you want to use it. And after activating, we recommend you go to assign the visual process flows, as these are useful in setting up and using inter-entity transactions and inter-entity trade. And I'm going to turn on the inter-entity trade APAR visual process flow. And this is what we'll be using to help us with the setup and the processing of transactions. But before getting stuck into the setup, let's just look at our license code. And with an inter-entity trade license code, you can see the license code here. And in the inter-entity setup, you only have the trade options. If I had a bundle license, I would see all the inter-entity transactions options as well. And the final setting you need to check in About Licenses, Current Users on the IAP tab, you need to ensure that this workstation uses Integration Access Pack licenses for external applications is deselected. If you have not purchased additional IAPs, you must not leave this option selected, otherwise you will run out of IAPs and you'll get IAP errors in your audit trail. Without this option selected, Inter-Entity Trade will use a concurrent LAN pack to do transactions in target databases. The configuration required for APAR trade depends on the type of transactions you want to automate. And you do the configuration in the source company, i.e. the company where the original transaction is entered. For this training, we're going to do 3 different examples. The first one, we're going to do AP to AR trade. We're going to enter an AP invoice and let inter-entity trade auto-create the associated AR invoice. The second example we're going to do is AR to AP trade. We're going to enter an AR receipt and let inter-entity trade auto-create the AP payment. And the third example we're going to do is AR to AP trade with elimination entries. We're going to enter an AR invoice and let inter-entity trade auto-create the AP invoice and the GL elimination entries to eliminate the intercompany profit in our elimination company. The first example we're going to do is AP to AR trade, invoice to invoice. In SAM Ltd, we're going to enter an AP invoice, and we're going to use our mapped vendor for that invoice. And we're going to use the mapped expense account on that invoice. And then when we post the invoice, Inter-Entity Trade is going to create the AR invoice in SAM Inc. for our mapped customer for the mapped revenue accounts. And we will see that the invoice can optionally be auto-posted. This is the configuration we're going to do now. Using the Inter-Entity Trade APAR visual process flow, the top half shows us the setup and the bottom half shows us the transactions, the processing using Inter-Entity Trade. Initially, you need to consider your admin services security setup, which users have the ability to do the Inter-Entity Trade setup. And then in Inter-Entity Setup, in the trade options, you need to turn on AP to AR trade if you're wanting to mirror AR from AP transactions, and AR to AP trade if you want AR transactions to result in mirrored AP transactions. And then for each of the trade options, you would select whether you want to include invoices to invoices, credit notes to credit notes, and if you're doing payments to receipts, you would select these options. When Inter-Entity Trade, AP Trade creates AR invoices, you could have your own source ledger so that in AR you can distinguish that these are automated invoices from inter-entity transactions. So you could have, for example, ITIN for inter-entity trade invoices. And similarly, for the AR trade, we can say whether we want AR invoices to create AP invoices, AR credit notes to create AP credit notes, and AR receipts to create AP payments. And you can specify the source ledger for the AP invoices being created. You also have a choice whether or not the target batches get auto-posted, both the invoice and the receipt batches. I'm leaving mine as not to be auto-posted. And similarly for the AP invoices and payments that get created, you can select whether those auto-post or not. And typically you would turn on the use account to account distribution set mapping. So for my AP to AR trade, I need to map my expenses to revenue. And for my AR to AP trade, I need to map my revenue to expenses. If I don't turn this option on, then it assumes that your expense and revenue accounts are the same across the multiple databases. Inter-entity trade always sends the transaction to the target database in the same currency as the source database. But when you have the same functional or home currency, you can use user specified rate, in which case the currency exchange rate from the source transaction will be transferred to the target transaction. If you don't have the same home currency, then you would select use default currency rate, and the target transaction will be recalculated using the Common Services exchange rate for the transaction date. And on the AP/AR integration tab, you need to map from your source to your target documents what fields you want to flow from the source to the target. So in this case, it's AP to AR documents that we're creating. What do we want to send to the AR batch description? We could send the source batch number and the posting sequence. And to the AR document number, we could send the original AP document number if we wanted to, or if we leave it blank, the AR document number will be auto-generated. And similarly, our AR to AP, we can map the fields. And for the AP document number, I'm going to force the AR document number into the AP document number because AP document numbers do not auto-generate. And we can optionally include the user ID and the organization ID where the batch came from. And after setting up your inter-entity trade options, you would fill in your trade organization setup. Here you need to provide a user ID and a password for all the target databases which we're going to create transactions in. So if I'm currently in SAM Ltd, and if I'm going to create transactions in SAM Inc., then I need to select my SAM Inc. database and provide a user ID and password so that I can create my AP or AR transactions in SAM Inc. And this user ID must have the security clearance to create batches and transactions, AP or AR, depending which way you're using AP/AR trade. First, you need to create your intercompany vendors and customers. So it could be AP in this company, AR in the target company, or AP in this company creates AR in this company, or it could be AR in this company creates AP in the target company. And it's recommended that you use intercompany account groups for these customers and vendors so that's easy to report on them. In our case, we're going to have an AP vendor in SAM Ltd, where we're going to raise invoices for SAM Inc. So in SAM Ltd, we have vendor 9001 belonging to our intercompany group code. And in SAM Inc., we have our customer 9000, which represents SAM Ltd in SAM Inc. And back in our sample company limited, we can now go and do our AP/AR trade setup. So we want to automate AP documents to AR documents, and our source vendor is 9001. Our target company is SAM Inc., And now our finder is on SAM Inc., not on SAM Ltd. And if we search for our customer, we find our SAM Ltd customer. And in our case, we're going to mirror the transactions. So our price multiplier will be 1. You would use a price multiplier of greater than 1 to mark up an invoice and a price multiplier of less than 1 to mark down an invoice. 1 means you are mirroring the invoice. And when doing AP to AR trade, you can automate AP payments to AR receipts. And here you specify the receipt bank code in the target database, in this case, SAM Inc. I'll come back to the elimination entries with another example. Include PJC, so if we do want to pass across the project code, contract code, and task code to the target database, we can include PJC fields, and then the source, project, contract, and task from the source transaction will be passed across to the target transaction. But there's no mapping of projects, so you need to set up the AP projects in the source company to match the AR projects in the target company, as the codes will just be pushed across one for one. Include transaction line tax refers to the fact whether or not we want to pass the tax entered on the source document across to the target document, or do you just want to pass the source amount through to the target document and let the company receiving that particular invoice calculate the tax? So it depends on your setup. In our case, we are just going to pass through the source amount and let the target company calculate the tax. And then we need to map our expense to revenue accounts. When doing AR to AP, we can map an individual account to a distribution set if required. You can also use wildcards. For example, you could map 56 ? to 66 ? That means 5601 will become 6601, etc. And for optional fields, if you have the same labeled optional field at the same level on the source and target documents, for example, header to header or detail to detail, then inter-entity trade will push the optional field values from the source document to the target document. Once we've created our AP/AR mappings, we can go ahead and process a invoice against vendor 9001, and it will be mirrored to customer 9000. So here we've recorded our accounting expense for SAM Inc. of $900. And when we post this batch, Inter-Entity Trade recognizes that vendor 9001 is a AP/AR mapped vendor. And if we go to the audit trail, we will find the batch that was created in the target. So posting sequence 34 into our target organization of SAM Inc. The source batch 60 created a target batch 36, document 1, invoice 12 in the target database. And if we go into SAM Inc. and look for that AR invoice batch, we see the batch, and we had mapped through the source batch number and the posting sequence, the user ID, and the company that did the posting. And here we see invoice 12, which was auto-generated on this side because we didn't pass through the invoice number, the revenue account of 4,200, and the amount of 900. And this is unposted because we did not elect to post the target batch. But back in our source company, if we record another invoice, but this time we select an account which has not been mapped, and we'd get the same effect if we posted an invoice to a locked period or for a customer that was inactive or did not exist. So we've used account 6100. When we go ahead and post that and we check what happened in our audit trail, we can see for posting sequence 35 for our target organization of SAM Inc., our source document batch number, we can see we've got a invalid document. And the reason for the invalid document is telling us that the GL distribution account 6100 was not found in the IET trade mapping. So once we go ahead and correct this error and map our account to the appropriate revenue account, We could go to the inter-entity transactions periodic processing and reprocess the error entries in APAR trade. We can select documents in error status or documents with invalid status, which I believe this one was. We can select the individual invoice ranges or do all and click process. And back in our audit trail, we can see now that target batch 37, invoice 13 is now exported and no more errors. If there had been another error, for example, the period was locked or the customer was inactive, then the error status would have been updated. And in our target batch, we have batch 37 against our delivery revenue of $7,000, and we can go ahead and post this batch. Reviewing the APAR trade audit inquiry in a database where I have more entries, you can either filter for the entries using these selection criteria at the top, or you can filter using Control F on any column. So if I wanted to see all the errors or all the entries where the target organization ID is ORC-Inc. 3, I can filter on target organization ID ORC-Inc. 3 and make the audit trail more manageable to work with. In a very recent product update, we have included the date created and time created for these audit trail entries, so you can filter on those entries too. So you could filter for everything created on the 26th, and the filter is cumulative. So I'm now filtering for organization ID ORC-Inc. 3 and date filter equal to the 26th of October. The second example we're going to do is AR to AP trade. We're going to enter an AR receipt, and inter-entity trade will auto-create the AP payment. In SAM Inc., we're going to enter an AR receipt for the mapped customer, and we're going to apply the receipt to the invoices that were previously created by inter-entity trade, and then go ahead and post the receipt. An inter-entity trade will auto-create the AP payment in SAM Ltd for the map vendor and bank code that we set up in SAM Inc. And the AP payment will be applied to the AP invoices that are linked to the AR invoices that the receipt was applied to. And the payment batch can be optionally auto-posted. And this is the configuration we're going to do now. Now that we have AP invoices in Sample Company Limited and AR invoices in Sample Inc., when we come to settle these, we could either do an AP payment in Sample Company Limited and have the AR receipt being automated, or we could go into SAM Inc. and do the AR receipt and have that cause the AP payment to be automated. That's what we're going to do. We're going to record the AR receipt and have it automate the AP payment in SAM Limited. But in order to do that, we need to go into our Sample Inc. and we need to configure inter-entity trade in this database as well. So in our trade options, we need to turn on at least AR to AP trade because we're going to do an AR receipt to automate an AP payment. We're not going to select the auto posting. And in our AP/AR integration, we need to say how we want our transactions information to flow from the source to the target transaction. So we're going to send to the AP payment batch description, we're going to send our source batch number, posting sequence, and the user ID and the organization where it came from. And the AP payment document number is also going to get the batch number and posting sequence, user ID, and organization ID where it came from. And then we need to configure our trade organization. In this case, we need to go back into SAM Limited to be able to create that payment. We've already created the AR customer in our source, and in the target database, we have our AP vendor. And in this case, we need to do an AR document to an AP document. Our customer 9000 goes to SAM Ltd vendor 9001, and we need to select a bank code in SAM Ltd for the payment. And now we can go ahead and do our AR receipt batch. And if we apply the receipt to invoices that were created by trade, inter-entity trade, then when the payment is created in SAM Ltd, it will be applied to the same invoices that were linked to these invoices. If these invoices are not found in the audit trail in trade, then the AP payment will just be a prepayment. So when we go ahead and post this batch and check our audit trail, we see that post in sequence 23 for this receipt created a payment in the target database, batch 57, document 1. So back in our sample company limited, we should have an AP payment batch created by inter-entity trade for the $1,600 in USD and applied to the 2 invoices that we posted previously. Inter-entity trade always sends the source amount across to the target database. So it's important to set up your intercompany vendors and customers to have the same source currency. In our case, it's USD. And this batch was unposted because we didn't select that option in trade in SAM Inc. And the last example we're going to do the configuration and transactions for is AR to AP trade. We're going to have an AR invoice auto-create an AP invoice, but we're also going to automate the GL elimination entries to eliminate the intercompany profit. In SAM Ltd, we're going to enter an AR invoice. We're going to use our AR to AP map customer and the mapped revenue account. We're going to post that invoice. An inter-entity trade will automatically create an AP invoice for the map vendor and the mapped expense account in SAM Inc. And this invoice can be optionally auto-posted. And then inter-entity trade is going to auto-create the GL journal for the mapped GL accounts in SAM ELIM. And the final example we're going to run through is AR to AP trade, and we're going to automate the elimination entries. So the setup needed for this in our trade options, we need to ensure that we have got AR to AP trade selected, and we filled in our mappings from the AR document to the AP document. In the trade organization setup, we need to fill in our connection details for our target company, which in our case is SAM Inc., and for our elimination company, which in our case is SAM Elim. And we're going to be doing AR to AP. So in our source company, we need to have our customer. So customer 9001 is our intercompany customer for SAM Inc. And across in SAM Inc., we need to have the associated vendor, our intercompany payables for SAM Ltd. And then in the source company, in our case, Sample Company Limited, we need to enter the AP AR setup. So here we're going to do AR documents to AP documents from our partner account. Our customer 9001 is going to automate AP entries in SAM Inc. against vendor 9000. We're not doing a markup. And if we do any payments or receipts, it's CCB Bank for the automated AP payments. And in this case, we've elected to create an elimination entry. And here we specify our elimination company. And then on each of our revenue to expense mappings, so we're going to record our AR invoice against account 4200. It's going to create an AP invoice in SAM Inc. for account 6000. And at the same time, it's going to eliminate this revenue and expense in our elimination company. And the debit is going to be to the revenue account, and the credit is going to be to the expense account. So we've created an invoice for SAM Inc. for $680 for our revenue, our delivery revenue. And when we post this transaction, we can go to the audit trail to see what happened. Our AR document for customer 9001, posted in batch 67, document 1, has created AP batch 26 in SAM Inc. And in the elimination company, it is created GL batch 196 entry 1. As entries are added to the audit trail, the date and time of the entry being added is inserted. And if there's an error and reprocessed through periodic processing, the date amended will be updated as well. So looking first into our target company, Sam Inc., we see the AP Invoice batch, not posted because we didn't select to auto post, and the document total is 680. And in our elimination company, we find our GL batch with the credit to the expense account and the debit to the revenue account. We have just seen the setup in AP and AR necessary for inter-entity trade. We need to have the intercompany vendors and intercompany customers in the source company and in the target company. And then in inter-entity setup, we needed to configure the trade options. We needed to create our trade organization records so we could access target databases. And we needed to create our AP and AR trade partners. And during posting of transactions, we needed to keep an eye on the APAR audit inquiry for audit entries and errors. And we used the APAR periodic processing to reprocess errors. Thank you for watching this inter-entity trade training video, AP and AR. For more information on inter-entity trade and other Orchid products, please go to www.orchid.systems.